Hello, I'm Dr. Diane Webster. I have a very special short story for you today because it's the story of my grandfather's life told from his own heart. This story is called Two Brothers and it starts at Gallipoli Peninsula in April 1915 at the Anzac Landing. It's based on true events from war records, archives, births, deaths and marriages registries, and also personal accounts from my relatives before they died. So let's begin. Two Brothers, Gallipoli, April 1915. Are you okay, Charlie? Bill asked me loudly, trying to be heard over the gunfire around us. I'm good, mate, I replied. It was still dark. We had made it up the beach, off the boat, by scrambling on our stomachs, and found a shallow cave or dugout at the base of the Gallipoli cliffs, where we seemed to be out of the line of fire from the Turks above. What are we doing here, I'm thinking. Why did I decide to sign up with my younger brother Bill? Bill was determined to sign up. Anything, he said, to get away from the chaos and squalor of the family home and Dad's boot factory in Collingwood. I had to agree with him when he came up with the idea. Dad had been a bootmaker in Cressy, Tasmania, near Launceston. Mum was also from Launceston and she married Dad when she was only 17. Dad always said she was tough because she came from convict stock. Her grandparents had been transported over from Ireland into Tasmania for some petty thefts. So sure, they were convicts, but they'd got their freedom after serving their sentences and they had started new lives as emancipists. I guess Dad really wasn't that much older than Mum at the time, at 22, but they had to get married because I was on the way. Little did I know I would end up being the eldest of 17 children. Bill was my closest sibling, just 2 years younger than me. Dad worked hard making boots in Cressy, but he never seemed to be making any money. Mum continued having children, with one born nearly every year until we moved to Melbourne. To get a better life, according to Dad. There were more opportunities, apparently, in Melbourne than Cressy. By the time we moved to Melbourne in 1892, I was 20 and had 10 other brothers and sisters. Little did I know there were 7 more to come over the next 7 years. Mum was terribly sad when little Percy died. He was only 4 years old and died of the fever in Cressy. But Mum just kept on having more babies. It was her religion, she said, Roman Catholic, so no preventative measures allowed. She lost another child too, little Clary, only 3, when he died in Melbourne in 1896. Dad started a new boot factory in Dyke Street, Collingwood, as soon as we settled in Melbourne. The house abutted the factory in Dyke Street, and it was just too small for all of us. I wanted to leave, but I had no money, so I just had to put up with it, and I worked hard with Dad making boots. I was 30 years old when I finally married my cousin, Kath Sneezewell. There was certainly a lot of family pressure there. She was 28 and hadn't found anyone by that stage, so she was considered by the family almost an old maid. After we married, she moved into the family home also in Dyke Street, and like my father, we had to marry because she was already pregnant with young Ted. It was only 2 years later that Edith followed. Now I really felt trapped. A wife and 2 kids. I tried to stay out of the house as much as possible. After work, I would go straight to the pub and drink until closing time. We'd often buy some booze, Bill and I, and then take it to a mate's place to drink. Bill didn't want to go home to Dyke Street either, because by 1914 he also had a wife and 3 young kids living in the same house with us. Bill and I weren't young in 1914. I was 43 and Bill 41. But we wanted an adventure. So Bill's idea of signing up wasn't so bad. We signed up at Melbourne Town Hall and went off together. There was basic training in Egypt, and then it was onto the boat sailing for Turkey. We were seeing the world. After we came back from Gallipoli, things weren't so good. We got evacuated back in 1915 because Bill and I had battle fatigue. They told us at Heidelberg Hospital that we could recuperate there for several months, but then we would be discharged from the army after we recovered. And then we went back home. It didn't take long for Bill to get itchy feet again. "I'm going to sign up again, Charlie. I need to get away," he told me. "You're crazy, Bill," I said. "Wasn't Gallipoli enough for you?" But it obviously wasn't enough for Bill, because as 1916 came around, we find ourselves back at the recruitment office in Broadmeadows. We're signing up for France this time. I just wouldn't let Bill go alone. I'd looked out for him at Gallipoli, and we'd made it home then, so I would try to be by his side again. Bill never made it home this time, though. I found out that he'd been killed in France just 8 months after we signed up. Bill and I got separated right from the start this time, and I never saw him again. Once I knew Bill was gone, I tried to get back to Australia as soon as I could. I thought that when I lost my thumb to a bullet, I would be allowed to leave, but no way would they let me go home. I lasted until the end of the war and even made sergeant. For months, I'd had this terrible stomach pain, but it was only when I collapsed vomiting blood in 1918 that they finally put me on a hospital ship and sent me back to Melbourne. Back in Melbourne, I found myself in Heidelberg Hospital again, and with what they called a peptic ulcer. After months of treatment, I was finally discharged, but not back home for long. I was determined now to get a new life. I met a girl, Minnie, short for Amelia, and I just wanted to spend time with her, to take my mind off things. I was 50 by this time, and she was only 26, but I felt young when I was with her. One day she told me she was pregnant. Now this is not good. My wife is Roman Catholic, and I have 2 children already with her. As I expected, my wife wouldn't grant me a divorce. So Min and I, determined to start our own adventure, drove to Sydney and just got married. I figured since I had married Kath in Melbourne, there's no way they could find out in Sydney without digging. Victoria and New South Wales had completely separate set of records of births, deaths and marriages in 1922, and no one would be the wiser if we married. Our honeymoon was the drive back to Melbourne after the registry office ceremony. Being married to Minnie filled me with energy. I was determined to make a success of my life now. I started my own boot factory in Plenty Road, Preston, and we lived at Minnie's father's house in Reen Street Reservoir. It was a little crowded because Min's brother and his wife were also living there, but nothing compared to the sardine tin we had left behind in Collingwood. Our 3 children, Keith, 1922, Joan, 1925, and Bob, 1928, followed quickly. But the new factory was making good money, and I was able to buy some land in Regent. That's a fancy name for part of Preston at the time. And I built a house for us. 40 Oak Hill Avenue, Regent, was our address. I was determined that my children would get a good education, and I paid for them to attend the top private schools. Keith went to Camberwell Grammar, Joan went to Melbourne Church of England Girls Grammar, and Bob went down to Geelong Grammar to board. I didn't forget my first wife and kids either. Each week, my oldest son, Ted, who had become a tram conductor by now, would come to the factory and collect the envelope of money for his mother, himself, and his sister. They had a home of their own, which I had bought for them. But never did the two families meet. It was a dark family secret that I had two families, and Minnie was determined that no one would ever find out and blacken the family name. So it was never spoken of. Unfortunately, with all the stress of the factory and two families to support, my drinking habit came back to bite me. Keith was good to me. He was only 14 at the time and not old enough to hold a driving license, but he would come for me at the pub and help me into the car, drive me home, to collapse on the sofa. Keith asked me one day, "So what did happen at Gallipoli, Dad? How did you and Uncle Bill survive it?" "Well, Keith," I said, "we made it scrambling up the beach, dodging the Turks' bullets. And we found this kind of cave of sorts, a dugout hole that could fit just the two of us. Bill and I didn't like fighting. We didn't want to kill anybody either. So we decided we'd just stay there for a few days. And that's what we did. As soon as we saw the Allies evacuating the wounded back to the ship, we joined them with battle fatigue, or shell shock, as they called it. We were helped back onto the ship and then finally home to Australia." Epilogue. Charles Henry Morris II died from a heart attack peacefully at home on December the 2nd, 1947. He was 75 years of age. His boot factory was very successful, supplying the Australian Army with boots for the soldiers throughout the Second World War. Only his second family attended his funeral. Thanks for watching. You can find more stories like this on YouTube at Dr. Diane Leslie Webster or on TikTok. Please subscribe if you like this and comment if you'd like to hear more stories like this.